Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about BTS. Shocking, I know, but specifically I want to talk about BTS and the concept of masculinity, and really just do a deep dive into this topic to understand why so many boys and men tend to often have some really weirdly strong feelings of hate towards BTS. And let's be real, it's not just about music taste. If you're an ARMY, you know BTS's discography is huge and diverse, and hating on them because of their music is a little hard to understand. If anything, if you don't like their music, you would be indifferent, not hateful. Obviously, I'm not expecting everyone to be a fan of BTS, but if you've seen locals on Twitter or people on YouTube who are like listening to BTS for the first time, oftentimes their exploration ends with them liking at least a few tracks from BTS, maybe even adding them to their playlists. Because, in my opinion, there is something for everyone in BTS's discography. So you don't necessarily need to be their fan, but if you try, really give them a chance, go into it for the music and not with hate and prejudice, you might just come out with a very different opinion on BTS. But the hate that I want to talk about today is different. It's the one that comes from men. It seems to run a little bit deeper. It's about how BTS challenge traditional ideas of masculinity and how people react when these norms are pushed. So let's talk about it, but disclaimer before we get into it, this isn't misandry, and if you get triggered by some of what I say, maybe that is an invitation to look inwards. Starting off with toxic masculinity. Now, I'm not saying masculinity itself is toxic. Far from it, but toxic masculinity specifically distorts this concept of masculinity by enforcing rigid stereotypes and norms that constrain men. It teaches them to embody certain traits in an exaggerated, almost unnatural way. Men should be stoic, aggressive, dominant. They must avoid being vulnerable, emotional, and sensitive. These qualities are seen as weaknesses, or as feminine. This narrow view of masculinity not only harms men by limiting their emotional expression, but also perpetuates harmful behaviors in society. Now let's look at BTS and how their approach to masculinity challenges this traditional notion. BTS represent a more nuanced, fluid, and emotionally expressive side of masculinity. Cultural symbols and conventions like colors, gestures, and expressions are not inherent in objects or behaviors but are socially constructed and can evolve over time. So BTS promote this other form of masculinity, which I would argue is authentic masculinity. They show that vulnerability, emotional expression, and self-affirmation are strengths, not weaknesses. They reject outdated societal standards, following which can lead to a lot of mental health and morale issues among men, and by doing so, they also present aspects traditionally seen as feminine to not only be completely acceptable, but also commendable and, let's be honest, more fun. One of the biggest ways BTS do this is through fashion and makeup, and that is also a major reason why some boys feel threatened by BTS. BTS wear makeup, and not in the Hollywood actor who pretends he's not wearing a full face of Bobby Brown and he's just naturally handsome and rugged, but in the embrace beauty as an art form way. In many societies, contexts, and places, makeup on men still carries a stigma. While idols wearing makeup in Kpop is normalized, even in Korea it does not come without heavy criticism from other men. When BTS's global success brought that aesthetic into the Western mainstream, it clashed with deeply ingrained ideas of what men look like. BTS's fashion often crosses traditional gender boundaries. The members themselves have talked about how they feel like fashion doesn't have any gender, and they've often also worn clothes marketed for women. Long story short, BTS show guys that they have more options than just these two basic starter kit outfits. They wear colorful outfits with varying silhouettes and embellishments typically associated with femininity, most notably the head-to-toe pink for Boy With Love. BTS embrace colors and styles conveying a message of fluidity in gender expression, indicating that men can wear whatever they feel comfortable in without being bound by societal expectations. This redefinition of masculinity aligns with a more heterosexual image, where self-care and aesthetics are not seen as exclusively feminine. Another major factor, emotions. BTS have been very open and vocal about mental health, with songs about depression, anxiety, loneliness, and self-love. In many cultures, especially among men, talking about these feelings is considered odd. So when BTS normalize these conversations, some guys who've been taught to suppress their emotions all their lives feel uncomfortable. It's like holding up a mirror to everything they were told not to be. BTS's emotional expression also challenges the typical notion of men as always tough or unemotional. By showcasing their feelings and vulnerability, BTS present a new model of masculinity where it's acceptable for men to express emotions openly and without shame. In a paper analyzing masculinity in BTS's music videos, which I will link below, the authors identify three main types of masculinity that BTS embody: heterosexual, sunbi, and bishonen. Metrosexuality refers to a focus on self-care, fashion, and appearance, which BTS embrace openly. In everyday contexts, however, metrosexual is often used as a derogatory term for straight men who take part in stereotypically feminine practices, which obviously leads to homophobia and sexism. Secondly, sunbi, a term derived from Korean culture, refers to a scholarly, refined masculinity that is not afraid to show gentleness and sensitivity. Lastly, bishonen, a Japanese term meaning beautiful boy, referring to an androgynous form of masculinity that blends traditionally masculine and feminine traits. By incorporating these three types of masculinities into their image, BTS offer a more inclusive and flexible understanding of what it means to be a man. Now, keeping all of that in mind, it seems like BTS are doing a lot from how men are perceived, which can inevitably trickle down to better self-esteem and mental health for male youths. Then why is it that instead of being grateful for this representation, men seem to dislike and shun them for it? For many boys and men, liking BTS feels like a social risk. Toxic masculinity punishes anything that's perceived as feminine. If a boy says he likes BTS, he might get teased or questioned about his masculinity and sexuality. It's not about the band itself, it's about the fear of being judged. The concept of masculinity and the fear of not being masculine enough is inherently tied to homophobia. This isn't just a fear of being gay, but a fear of appearing less than masculine, being perceived as weak. The constant anxiety of being unmasked as not a real man is a significant source of shame. This fear fuels not only homophobia but also sexism and racism. And it encourages exaggerated masculine behaviors like the defamation of women and non-heteronormative men, so that straight men can assert their dominance and protect their status. This social construction forces men to enact a form of masculinity that distances them from femininity, which they wrongly equate with weakness. Thus, they act out being aggressive, violent, controlling, and unwilling to compromise. Masculinity in its most aggressive form is also tied to violence. From childhood, boys are socialized to be tough and avoid anything that could be deemed weak behavior. This obsession with toughness leads many men to engage in dangerous behaviors to assert their masculinity, risking health and personal well-being to prove their manhood. Furthermore, acts of violence and physical dominance often become tools to assert power and gain status in social hierarchies. And it is also important to note that silence plays a critical role in reinforcing masculine norms. Men, afraid of being seen as weak or emotional, often stay silent when they witness sexist or homophobic actions. This silence, a byproduct of fear and shame, keeps this cycle of harmful masculinity intact and running, often leading to internalized stress, unhealthy behaviors, and broken relationships. And this is also a big reason why incels come to be. They follow these rigid rules, often consciously and unconsciously avoiding things they might actually be interested in or drawn to in order to fit into this weird mold of what a man is supposed to be. The irony here is that many modern women, far from being attracted to these hypermasculine traits, actually find comfort in men who don't conform to this tough guy persona. Women, particularly those seeking emotionally healthy relationships, tend to value men who are stable, self-aware, and emotionally intelligent, traits often vilified in traditional masculinity as being weak or feminine. Gentlemen who aren't afraid to express vulnerability, who avoid aggression, and who engage in respectful, kind behaviors are generally more attractive to women because they create a safe space for emotional intimacy and trust. In this context, the toxic and rigid masculinity that incels often cling to not only isolates them but also blinds them to the type of relationships they might actually desire and are capable of cultivating. They've spent most, if not all, of their lives giving up these things that matter to them to be seen as more desirable, only to be sidelined by these feminine men. That's gotta hurt. Seeing that girl you've been crushing on for years, who you showed your scars to because you thought she'd be impressed by how strong and tough you are, is actually in love with Jimin. That's gotta hurt, bud. There is also an added layer of cultural bias. BTS is a Korean group breaking into Western-dominated spaces. Some Western audiences dismiss them simply because they're not from the US or UK or Australia, or because they sing in Korean. So racism and the way East Asians are viewed by other races and ethnicities also plays a huge role in this. Now, why does this all matter? Honestly, there are still some armies who think that if BTS get more male fans, they'll be seen as more legit, using the John Cena is an army excuse to validate them. Why isn't it enough that many women from different backgrounds and identities find comfort in BTS? Why do women's interests have to be legitimized by men? Long story short, they don't. The point of this video is not to convert men into BTS stans. When certain men grow up to realize what true masculinity is, they'll learn all about what they've missed out on with chick flicks, BTS, self-care, fashion, mental health, etc. This is just to illustrate how BTS isn't just another boy band. They are cultural disruptors. They're helping redefine what masculinity can look like. Softer, kinder, emotionally open. And in doing so, helping society become more evolved and safer. BTS, of course, are not the first and only artists to do so. There have been icons before them, and there will be icons after them. But BTS are our present. It's important to uplift their message and support this positive portrayal instead of climbing onto an unnecessary hate train because you're insecure. But here's the silver lining. A lot of boys are breaking out of these toxic molds. The rise of skincare for men, more fluid fashion, and mental health awareness shows that change is happening. And BTS is a part of that shift. So next time you hear a man say, "I just hate BTS," ask him why. Is it really about the music, or is it about what BTS represent? A challenge to outdated ideas of what it means to be a man. And that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this deep dive, hit like, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. And I will see you in my next one.